I made this forgotten deck. Play so dirty. I'll take you through what you need to know about Tistina, from exploring their identity, game plan, and synergies, showing you the concepts I use when climbing with them through ranked, as well as little tips along the way. And it all starts with identity. Tistina's identity is what really got me hooked. They're an archetype that rarely anyone plays, has cool artwork, is non-meta, and is not terribly outdated, compared to some others out there. And for me, that checks off all the boxes when finding that underdog deck. But their lore is what really drew me in, and oftentimes understanding some lore can help piece together why cards behave certain ways. So after doing a bit of digging, here's who they are. The Tistina are these crystal-like beings who on the surface seem super shiny and dazzling, especially being light attribute monsters. But despite their appearance, they're not actually as virtuous as they may seem. It turns out that Tistina surprisingly has a bit of a darker lore to them, and that's because not all Tistina are made equal. Something that caught my eye was that although we have these bright and dazzling light monsters, a good number of the Tistina aren't even light. So I wondered, why is that? And that's where I started to piece together more of Tistina's true nature. Looking closely at some of their monsters, I learned that they resemble once ordinary animals, who got corrupted by invasive crystals growing on their bodies. And unfortunately for these animals, they now serve their light Tistina overlords. So we have this super cool lore going on here where Tistina aren't just these shiny crystal beings, but they're also these sinister corruptors as well. And what's awesome about this whole idea of crystallization is that it isn't just flavor, it's actually baked into how the deck plays. So what does this actually look like in practice though? Well, that's exactly what we'll get into there. Game plan. Tistina's game plan is where their lore comes to life. At their core, these sinister crystal beings want nothing more than to turn everything around them into crystals. And the way they do that in game is pretty awesome. It all starts with this monster that Tistina is built on. Crystal God Tistina is one of the light Tistina. And on our turn, she has the power to flip all of our opponent's monsters face down, while sending anything left face up to the grave. This is Tistina's way of spreading its corruption, turning everything into lifeless crystals while wiping away anything that resisted. It's an extremely powerful effect that is completely non-targeting and also avoids destruction floaters. And even though it may seem possible for our opponent to flip back up their cards, they won't have a chance to do so. And this is where Crystal God Tistina's evolution comes in. Tistina, the divinity that defies darkness, is what pulls it all together. When she's summoned, she sends all face-down cards on our opponent's field directly to the grave. So the monsters that were crystallized earlier, and any face-down cards just get wiped away. Usually at this point, it's pretty typical for Tistina to just go straight for game, since our opponent's field would be empty. But of course, game plans don't always work out. This is ranked after all, so there are times where we may get interrupted or we just don't have enough damage. So what happens then? Well, there is one tactic that Tistina can fall back on. One of the dirtiest cards in Tistina's arsenal is Discordance of the Tistina. Normally, it just lets us banish a single card from our opponent's graveyard face down. But if our Tistina divinity is on the field, Discordance's effect gets amplified to banish their entire graveyard face down. Although this technically isn't a win condition, pulling off Discordance's full effect is pretty lethal. I mean, not many decks can recover cards that have been banished face down, let alone their entire graveyard. So this might make you think, since Tistina comes with so much board breaking potential, does that mean their game plan is to go second? Well, that is one way to play them. But with some relatively recent support, Tistina can actually play going first. It's actually my preferred way to play them, especially with how powerful meta decks are if we let them go first. Now, Tistina may not have the strongest turn 1 end board. I mean, they are able to bring out some Exceed monsters and also some Link monsters. But it's also Tistina's survivability and floating potential that makes them surprisingly dangerous. Plus, it's pretty fun to see when your opponent doesn't know about them. Trust me when I say that knowledge about fighting Tistina isn't on everyone's mind. Just like shattered crystals reforming themselves, a good portion of Tistina's cards don't mind being destroyed. And what's awesome is that when they do, they get to play dirty. Floating in Demigod to Tistina, or Crystal God Tistina so that both are on the field lets us crystallize even on our opponent's turn. And Crystal God Tistina can do this again when she's destroyed. And if you thought crystallizing the field was powerful just on our turn, it's even more devastating when done on our opponents. So it's this combination of setting up a board with subtle interruption and dangerous follow-up that I find really fun about Tistina as a turn 1 strategy. It makes for more back and forth interactions in Tistina's game plan that I really love. But I will admit, Tistina wouldn't be able to do this completely on their own. In fact, there are some pretty cool things that we can do with cards outside of Tistina's archetype. And especially if you want Tistina to have a chance to push through the challenges in ranked, they're gonna need some synergies. Tistina's synergy with other cards is where it comes together. It's also where I get to spice up my builds. I often like to take a good look around to see what other Tistina fans like to run, or to try out some wacky things on my own to see how they feel. Ultimately, finding what is actually feasible for climbing ranked is what I like to push for. So after tons of grinding through ranked, I found that these are probably the most impactful synergies worth adding to any Tistina build. Since we can easily turbo out level 10 monsters, Varudras, the final bringer of the end of times, is honestly a must in any Tistina build. Not only can it omni-negate and break boards, but it can also detach Miasma Dragon Tistina's material. What's awesome about the synergy is that sending Miasma Dragon to the grave gives us a search, regardless of whose turn it is. And a search can be pretty deadly. Of course we could always grab follow-up for next turn, but something I like to do is use Miasma Dragon Search to grab something that can really slow down my opponent. And assuming that my board was set up properly, disrupting my opponent looks something like this. Varudras dumps Miasma Dragon as cost to omni-negate, which lets me search for Crystal God Tistina. Then by using Play with the Tistina, I can bring Crystal God out to stand right next to Demigod for some instant crystallization. Now I know this isn't the most powerful board out there by any means. Boiling it down, it's practically just an omni-negate plus a one-sided Book of Eclipse. But whether you're playing Tistina as a turn 1 strategy or a blind second strategy, Varudras' synergy with Miasma Dragon works so well when trying to break through boards, or set up another interruption. While Tistina has no shortage of rank 10 options like Varudras or the Unga Bunga trains for example, there's something else that we can do with our level 10 monsters, and the synergy with this card is honestly quite dirty. Now that it's off the ban list, Metamorphosis lets us turbo out some of the most powerful extra deck monsters in the game. I mean, bringing out monsters like Naturia Exterio for infinite back row negation, Saint Azamina for anti-targeting shenanigans, and Azamina for board breaking can sometimes win games on their own. Now I know that Metamorphosis is generally seen as a win more card, especially when it takes a large commitment to bring out a specific leveled monster. But for Tistina, this isn't a problem at all. In fact, oftentimes Tistina's very first summon is a level 10 monster. So in case we do get interrupted to a point where we can't bring out any more monsters, Metamorphosis comes in pretty handy as a backup. And just to put this out there, I do know that the stuff Metamorphosis brings out is generally pretty crazy, but when we're up against the meta, I see it as fair game. But to dive a bit deeper, I want to go over some board breaking synergies as well. These are what really help me push through even the strongest setups. Personally, Forbidden Droplet is my go-to board breaker for Tistina. It just synergizes so well with how Tistina works, especially when going second. Now of course that doesn't mean we don't run other powerful board breakers like Super Poly. I mean, monster removal is still extremely useful. But in the case of Forbidden Droplet, keeping our opponent's monsters on the field is, as surprisingly as it may sound, just as useful. Not only is it a requirement for our Tistina to crystallize our opponent's field, but our opponent controlling monsters also helps enable bonus effects hidden within Tistina's spells, and they're definitely worth noting. When our opponent controls at least 3 face-up cards, Divine Domain God Tistina lets us bring out Crystal God Tistina straight from our deck. Meanwhile, Breath of the Tistina lets us flip down our opponent's monsters instead of our own. So by using Droplet to just negate our opponent's monsters, our Tistina gets to gain their bonus effects to make crystallizing our opponent's field a whole lot easier. Now I know there are a bunch of other awesome board breakers out there, but as a turn 1 Tistina player, I like to stick to cards that I can use whether I win the coin flip or not. But before I wrap up Tistina Synergies, I do want to mention that there's actually some awesome Aqua support to look forward to. They're not currently in Master Duel as of this video's release, and they're not part of Tistina's archetype. But with the way that they work, they're practically indirect Tistina support, so you might want to keep an eye out for these when they land. Vodnika the Fountain Spirit is a level 10 monster that can summon himself whenever another level 10 monster is sent to the grave. Plus he lets us revive a monster onto our opponent's field for a draw, and is searchable with chaotic elements. I wonder which deck likes to use level 10 and archetype monsters. Now the revival effect may seem a bit odd, but it's designed to work with chaotic elements graveyard effect, which would let us steal a monster. And on top of this, with the sheer number of ways that Tistina can dump a level 10 to the grave, bringing out Vodnika isn't too much of a problem. But because Vodnika can't really do anything on its own, I'd probably just run him at 1 copy. Overall, he's an awesome piece of support that synergizes really well with Tistina. But here's one more new support that's definitely worth mentioning. Recurring the Living Quicksilver is a rank 10 Exceed monster that essentially lets us one-time dump a monster from our deck to the grave. Plus as a bonus, it stops our opponent's monster's effects from activating in the grave. Now, Recurring's Floodgate effect only works against monsters that share an attribute with cards in our grave. But between the Light Tistina and their corrupted counterparts, we are able to practically cover every attribute. Now personally, with all the Exceed monsters out there, would I make Mercurium over something like Verusius for example? Probably not. Mercurium is more of a situational tech that of course works great against graveyard reliant decks. But when playing turn 1, I don't always have enough information about my opponent's deck. Plus the monster dumping effect is nice, but it's also a bit slow since it happens during the end phase. So for those reasons, I'd probably run Mercurium at just 1 copy as well. And yeah, that pretty much sums up all the things I learned about Tistina. Of course I didn't go over every little detail about them, but hopefully it's enough to give you a taste of just how dirty this forgotten deck can actually be. And here's my deck list. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment or consider subscribing. It lets me know that the content that I make makes your day a little better. I hope it does. Plus I do my best to reply to every comment. But if you thought Tistina was a super cool deck to try out, maybe you'll also want to check out my other video where I use the most tragic heroes to play just as dirty. It's super awesome. Anyways, thanks for stopping by. Bye bye!